Lecia. Thank you, my friends. My name is Roger Fernandes, and I'm a Native American artist. I belong to the Lower Elwha Kellum people of Western Washington. Our real name is Kellum, which means strong people, but our English speakers call us Kellum. So, I'm going to share a story with you. I'm a storyteller, I'm a teacher. I'm going to teach you something in this story. A long time ago, the world was very different than it is today. We all know where the sky is, right? The sky's way up there, but in this story, the Snoqualmie people tell, the sky was not way up there. It was dark and heavy and way down here. Here is where the sky was, right here. And because of that, the people had to walk around bent over all the time, because if they stood up, they'd bump their head in the sky. So this is how they walked, bent over all the time. And because of this, they started to argue, complaining, yelling at each other. Then they began to fight, hitting each other, pushing each other. This is how the world was, people arguing and fighting all the time. And is this how people should be? Of course not. Well, there was a little girl in one of these villages. She said, "This isn't right. My people are always arguing and fighting. There must be something I can do." And so she thought, and she thought, and she thought. She had an idea. She walked out of the house, put her hands in the sky, and pushed up as hard as she could. And she felt the sky move a tiny bit. She said, if I call the other people out and tell them my plan, maybe we can work together and push it up a little bit more. So she called them out, and she told them her plan, but they were grumpy. That's a crazy idea. That'll never work. She said, "Oh, please try just once." They said, "All right." So they all put their hands in the sky, and they pushed up as hard as they could. And they felt it move a little bit more. Now, this was a very smart little girl. She said, "I know. If we invite all the tribes around here to come to our village and all the tribes help, we can all push this guy up, push it out of our way, push it where it belongs." And the people said, "Now, little girl, that's a very good idea." So all the Indian tribes were called to that village up in the mountains. The plan was explained how we're going to push up the sky. And everyone agreed it was a good idea, but someone called out, "Wait a minute, there's a big problem here. We all have a different word for push and work. We all have different languages. So how can we work together? We all speak different languages." Well, the people thought and talked and argued, and they couldn't think of anything. But the people know, as we should know, if you have a problem you can't solve, you go to an elder, an old person, because old people are not just smart, they're also wise. They've lived a long time. So they went to this old man at the edge of the village and told him the problem. He said, "Let me think about it. 4 days, come back in 4 days and I will tell you." In 4 days they came back and he said, "You shall use the word Yahau. Yahau will mean work together. Yahau will mean push together. When I say Yahau, we all say Yahau and push up on that heavy sky." And so, if you want to join in, please do so. Put your hands right here. And when I say Yahau, you say Yahau and push up on that heavy sky. So here we go. Yahau. 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 Is that high enough? No, it's not. Let's get some big long poles from the trees and keep pushing. Yahau. 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 And so we did it. We pushed this guy up to where it is today. The Snoqualmie people say, if we work together, we can do great things. We can even push up the sky. We can do the impossible. So remember, work together. We can do great things. Thank you. Thank you for letting me share this story with you.
Thank you for that amazing story, Mr. Fernandes. And greetings to you all. I am David Dirks, the Director of Meetings and Events for the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I welcome you to the nationwide town hall on ending homelessness. Now, it goes without saying that this pandemic has drastically changed the way that we all live our lives, from the physical locations of where we work to the way that we interact with one another. And speaking of change, I know that for many of you, you were excited about joining us in Washington, D.C. this summer. Unfortunately, I don't know the next time we will be able to meet as a group again. But what I do know is that the Alliance is ever so committed to providing you with best practices, resources, and the information that you need to be successful in ending homelessness in your communities. We have assembled a great lineup of speakers today, and they will speak on some very important issues that we all must tackle as a nation and as a community. I now have the pleasure of introducing Alliance Board Member Irene Mabry Moses. Thank you once again. And as Mr. Fernandes says, let's continue to work together to lift up the sky and make the impossible happen for a lot of people in this country. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Thank you, David. Hello. My name is Irene Mabry Moses. I have served on the board of directors for the National Alliance to End Homelessness for 12 years. And having been homeless myself at one time, I know how important it is with good policies, resources, and quality leadership are needed to end homelessness. We have to provide opportunities for those who have had this experience and to be a part of the conversation and have a seat at the table and also be involved in the decision making. We have to uplift those who are experiencing homelessness, continue to advocate for those, more resources, making our voices heard. Since 1983, when this organization was founded, we continue to support your work wholeheartedly, and we appreciate all that you do. Today, I have the honor to introduce our fearless leader, Nan Roman, CEO and President of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and let me also welcome you to the National Alliance to End Homelessness Town Hall meeting. All of us on the staff and the board of the Alliance are so happy to have you with us. For those several thousand of you who we would normally see at our conference in DC in July, we really miss you. We just couldn't let the month pass without reaching out. But we also knew that there was just no way that we could replicate online the energy, the exchange of ideas, the sharing, the bonding that happens at the conference. So instead, we decided to at least bring us all together in some fashion, to share some thoughts, to send you some messages from partners across the country, and really just to touch base. I'm going to talk to you today about where we've been on homelessness, where we stand now, and what the future could bring. Because we're at a pivotal moment with respect to homelessness in our nation, and we have a lot to think about as we move forward. Looking at the past and where we were, I think it's important to remember that homelessness was not always a widespread problem in the United States. Prior to the early 1980s, there was more than enough affordable housing to meet the need, and there just wasn't widespread or long-term homelessness. That began to emerge in the early 1980s, when the supply of affordable housing units began to dwindle. So homelessness is not inevitable. When homelessness first started in the early 1980s, the major response, the only response really, was to get people off the street and provide them with food and shelter to tide them over until they could get back on their feet. Shelters were congregate, high barrier, often traumatizing and unsafe, despite the very committed and determined, if under-resourced, efforts of the staff that operated them. People who couldn't or didn't go to shelter were subject to arrest or citation. There wasn't any data, so it's not clear what the makeup of the population was in terms of race or disability or LGBTQ status, but it's probably safe to say it was somewhat similar to what it is now. Although Latinx people were underrepresented for quite a long time in the homeless population and only recently became disproportionately overrepresented. A lot has changed since we started. We're much more focused on housing now. There are hundreds of thousands of units of permanent supportive housing. There were none in the early 1980s. Hundreds of thousands of people have been rehoused using rapid rehousing. We've improved services through evidence-based models like critical time intervention and trauma-informed care. We've created coordinated local systems to make the help we give more efficient and effective. We have data that can show us who is homeless and what works and what doesn't, and can help us improve our outcomes and measure our progress. We've become much more aware and are starting to become more responsive to the disproportionality of people of color who experience homelessness. Awareness and support for LGBTQ people has improved, and there are also improvements in the appropriate response to their needs. But there is still discrimination in our systems, especially with respect to transgender people. There is a lot more money being invested in homelessness and its solutions from the federal government, but also from state and local governments, from philanthropy, from businesses in different sectors like healthcare. So we have a better financed, better designed, and more outcome-oriented system than we used to have. That's the good news. But, and it's a big but, what we have is not good enough. The number of homeless people is going up, not down. Most people who become homeless still can only expect to get under-resourced congregate shelter, if that. Shelters still have high barriers and limited ability to help people exit homelessness. 37% of people who are homeless are completely unsheltered. Too often they are blamed for having no place to live. They are criminalized and swept from their makeshift encampments with no alternative place to live provided. There is significant racial disproportionality. The public professes to care about homelessness, and I think generally the public does care. But they also want the problem solved, especially unsheltered homelessness, and for reasons that have little to do with compassion. The problem of homelessness is not solved, and not because we don't know what to do to solve it. We do know what to do to solve it, but because solving it is not a priority, not in terms of the resources, the money that's devoted to it, and not as part of the social contract we have with each other as citizens and residents of our nation. It's not that we can't end homelessness, it's that we as a nation have decided not to. So we have improved the homelessness system, but we have not ended homelessness. This is the situation we find ourselves in at the confluence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the national moment with respect to racial equity and justice. We have our pre-existing challenges that I just mentioned and to deal with, and the added challenges of COVID-19. But we also have some pretty significant opportunities to take a leap and improve our homelessness systems now and for the future. These opportunities include the availability of significant new resources through the CARES Act and FEMA, and hopefully more to come in the next stimulus bill. And they include the changing and more open landscape in which to take on the significant challenges of racial inequity and injustice in our work. It is absolutely critical that we seize the opportunities and use them to address homelessness wisely and strategically. This is not a business as usual situation. This is not just more of the same situation. Homelessness could grow or shrink depending on our approach, so there's a lot for us to think about. It was in this context that the Alliance, along with the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, put together a framework for the COVID-19 homelessness response. This is a plan and strategies to help you think through and address these issues. Underlying the framework are a few key values. First is the commitment to address racial and income disparities. We need to use the funds in a way that will help eliminate disparities, not exacerbate disparities. One way to do this is to involve people with lived experience, people of color, and others affected. In value of the framework is the imperative to help the people with the highest needs first. People who are homeless and unsheltered, older, medically vulnerable, disabled, or living with small children should be helped before people with less serious barriers and problems. This is also a race equity strategy, as people with more serious problems are more likely to be people of color due to the systemic discrimination in areas like healthcare and housing. It is very important not to use the homelessness money for either eviction prevention or housing. We want to take advantage of these funds to really get people into rehousing and revamp the homelessness system. It's also important if we are to change our system and avoid a massive increase in homelessness, that the goal of our work be housing people, not just getting them off the street and into shelters or hotels and motels. This is the best strategy, the best protection for their health, and also to ensure a solid economic recovery. And finally, we must act quickly in the context of the pandemic. Business as usual is just not going to work. We have to try to do in days and weeks what we might normally have done in months. We have to shorten the length of time people are homeless and shorten the length of time it takes to get them help. We have to speed the system up while we have the resources to do it. The framework provides guidance on where to focus your efforts and in what order. It covers 5 key areas: unsheltered homelessness, shelter, housing, diversion and prevention, and improving our systems for the future. I don't have time to go into the details here, but you can find them on our website, endhomelessness.org, under framework. This brings us to what we should be looking at to make things better in the future. Of course, with respect to homelessness, there's a lot to be concerned about in the future. Unemployment is through the roof, and poor and working class people are bearing the brunt of that. Eviction moratoria are going to end, and people will owe thousands of dollars in rent, money they simply don't have. There is likely to be a significant increase in homelessness. Economist Brendan O'Flaherty at Columbia has estimated a 40% increase. I can only hope that he's wrong about that. Homelessness is typically a lagging indicator of economic problems, so we might have some time before a new wave of homelessness hits. We need to use our resources to get as many people who are currently homeless into homes as possible. Our priorities should be to get all unsheltered people off the street and on their way to a home, to do immediate diversion for everyone at the front door of homelessness so that we can reduce the number of people who enter shelter and build our capacity to do diversion to scale in the future. We need to get every single person we possibly can into the pipeline for housing and into a home. Use FEMA funds to get folks into hotels and motels. Make sure any shelter they're in is low barrier, non-congregate, housing focused, welcoming, appropriate, and supportive to people of all races, cultures, and gender identities. Use the ESGCV and other CARES Act funds to get people into housing and be innovative about that housing. Sharing housing, acquiring properties, reconnecting people with families, new types of housing. We need to take this opportunity to house people and speed up the flow through the system in order to handle what is likely coming. Let me mention one other responsibility I think we have, and that is around voting. People experiencing homelessness are often dependent upon the decisions of public officials for their very survival. Who is elected matters to their well-being. Further, if we are to center racial equity in our work, given the historical and systemic efforts to suppress voting of minorities, especially African Americans, and given the disproportionality of these groups in the homeless population, we should be all over helping our consumers to vote. I would ask you to add to your already overwhelming responsibilities an initiative to register your clients to vote and to begin to plan now for how you will ensure that they are able to place their votes. There is no legal barrier to you doing this, just as long as you don't try to tell them who they should vote for. And indeed, I would say that it is our responsibility to ensure that people experiencing homelessness are not disenfranchised. The Alliance will help you with this in the coming weeks. We face many big issues in our nation, and you will hear others talk about them today. There is incredible economic inequality that has played out in the past few months in terms of who gets sick and who dies in the pandemic. There is a multi-million unit shortage of affordable housing that drives not just homelessness, but poor health, poor education, crime, and so many other social ills. There is inadequate health and behavioral health care for millions of people. There is the endless and immoral mark of historical and systemic racism on the lives of so many African Americans, Native and Latinx people, and its corrosive impact on the lives of every American. There is the destructive political tenor of the nation and the lack of compassion for our neighbors. One particular thing I want to speak to is the issue of policing and defunding the police. I'll only say this about it. As a nation, we are unwilling to meet people's basic human need for home, healthcare, and food. We're unwilling to create a floor beneath which we agree that people should not be allowed to fall. As a result of our unwillingness, we incur significant costs in emergency services, like the cost of shelter, emergency health care, and policing and incarceration. There is good reason to believe that it would cost less to give people a home, food, and health care than what we spend on these crisis interventions. So in addition to addressing the racist aspects of policing and not being sure whether putting the cart or the horse first is the best strategy, I do believe that if people had homes and their basic needs were met, we would not need to spend so much on expensive and inappropriate crisis responses like law enforcement. And the outcome, I think, would be far superior. But again, that's also a big problem, and there are a lot of big problems. And it can be tempting to say that we can't end homelessness until we solve these big problems. We all do have to work on these issues of justice, no question about that. But I believe that the work of ending homelessness doesn't have to wait until justice is fully achieved, but can contribute to the achievement of justice. I want to leave you with this. It's really the same place where I started. We have it in our power at this moment to do something big, something significant about homelessness. We have resources, we have some political will, we have knowledge, we have determination, and these are the necessary ingredients to make progress. We can make a change. In the 70s, when we didn't have homelessness, there was also income inequality. There was not universal health care. There was plenty of racism, discrimination, redlining. The nation was politically divided, and yet there was not homelessness to speak of. We can do better, and now, perhaps surprisingly, turns out to be an amazingly good moment for us to try. Thank you again for joining us, and I look forward to the time when we can all be actually together, not just virtually together, to work and to move forward to end homelessness. And now please enjoy this performance from Jehlad Hickson of the Voices of Our City Choir in San Diego, California.
Voices of Our City Choir has always served as a platform for people experiencing homelessness to speak what's on their minds and hearts and to lift every voice. And right now, we are especially lifting high up all of the voices of our Black choir members. May they be heard, may they have freedom to walk down the street, to not be criminalized, and to not be dehumanized any longer. Please enjoy this video. A Change is Gonna Come, featuring Jehlad from the choir, an amazing young man who's experienced homelessness throughout his life and is currently working on his MBA. Filmed by our videographer, Ebony Harvey. This video brings together so much hope and so much spirit. I hope you feel this. I hope you have a wonderful conference and that we keep the dream alive. On behalf of the choir, my name is Steph Johnson. Thank you so much for having us today.
I was born by the river in a little tent, just like the river I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. 'Cause I don't know what's up there, no, on the sky. It's been a long Long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Then I asked my brother, and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, there's been times when I thought I wouldn't last long, but now I find myself able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, and I know change will come. A change is gonna 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 come. Yes. A change is gonna come. A change is gonna come.
Whoa, what a wonderful performance. Let's give it up for Mr. Hickson from Voices of Our City Choir. And you are absolutely correct. A change is going to come. Hello, everyone. I am Chandra Crawford, the Director of Individual Homeless Adults at NAEH. And that's right. Change is happening across the country. We are starting to see movements in criminal justice, policing, and across many sectors. The conversation certainly has shifted within the past few months, and it is our responsibility. And actually, it has always been our responsibility. But since more people are recognizing it, we're going to say it loud. It is our responsibility to make sure that we are working towards, us personally, our organizations, working toward racial equity. And most importantly, we want to make sure that we are focused on dismantling racist practices and racist systems. So let me tell you some of the things that we've been doing to achieve this goal, because our biggest goal is that we want to make sure that we are equitably serving some of the most vulnerable populations in our communities. So the Alliance, many of you know, we have a racial equity network, and we call that the REN, and that is a group of community leaders and advocates who have come together to think about, strategize, and to help COCs figure out how to center racial equity in their work. And we are working on doing the same thing too. And so we, as an organization, are currently working on our procedures, our internal organizational structure, a whole host of things. And so we have a lot of work to do, but we are so committed. And this work requires commitment, courage, and leadership. That's why I am so honored to introduce the group of our next speakers, because they are leaders in this movement. So first up, we have Dr. Lecia Adams Kellum. She is from St. Joseph Center out of California. And then we have Dr. Lucius Couloute. He is from Suffolk University. And then we have Andere, the CEO. She is from Funders Together to Ending Homelessness. And then we have Harold Green, and he is from Flowers for the Living Foundation out of Chicago. Great speakers. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Lecia Adams Kellum, and I'm the president and CEO of St. Joseph Center in Los Angeles, California. We've all been through some really tough times in recent months, from the pandemic to the brutal murder of George Floyd, to the protests, and now we're seeing in recent weeks a resurgence of COVID-19. But I will say that I have remained inspired by our sector and our continued commitment to fighting homelessness and poverty and speaking up about racial injustice and the disparities that we see every day in our work. I am so proud of the heroes that we have in our various agencies and in our sector. You ran towards the virus. You did whatever was needed to save the lives of those who were most in need during a most difficult time in our history. Those of you who've done street outreach, you've worked in food pantries and in the food banks, you've called people to make sure that they were still fighting and continuing to do whatever was needed to stay alive. You've delivered masks, you've made masks. You have inspired a nation because you are the ones on the front lines. But I also salute my fellow leaders. It's been difficult making sure that we kept our agencies going, that we didn't have to lay any staff off or shutter any programs. We've worked the 12, the 16-hour days, and we've kept fighting and inspiring even when we were feeling depleted and overwhelmed. What's made this time so particularly difficult is that we witnessed the brutal murder of George Floyd. We listened to him cry out for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and it broke our hearts. But we know that we've been fighting this fight, and that really George Floyd's brutal murder calls us to action, to renew our sense of commitment to speaking up for those who've lost their way or people who've been mistreated in our country because of institutional systems and racial injustice that's been incredibly unfair. And yes, we remain committed to bridging the gap, but we must also commit ourselves to speaking out against those inequities. George Floyd's murder re-inspired us all to stand up and to speak out and to put ourselves at the forefront of the crisis that our country is facing and the mistreatment of people of color. I'm so proud of how brave our sector has been, how courageous we've been. We are a sector that stands on the right side of history. We've done it through this crisis, and I believe we'll do it again. Our clients are relying on us to not only serve them food and not only house them, but to speak up about the injustices that have put them in the position that they're in. That's our call to action at this time. I use my voice, and you use your voice together. Our voices will be loud and strong, and we will bring healing together. Thank you.
Peace, everyone. My name is Lucius Couloute. I'm an assistant professor of sociology and criminal justice at Suffolk University in Boston. And what I briefly want to do is discuss with you all the connection between criminalization and homelessness in the United States. And so what we know is that formerly incarcerated people are about 10 times more likely to be homeless on any given day than the general public. And so the reasons for this are many, right? Formerly incarcerated people are dealing with the stigma of a criminal record, which leads to discrimination in labor markets and housing markets. We also know that public housing authorities have historically erected barriers for this population. Formerly incarcerated people are also given limited access to wraparound services that would provide them with the kind of stable, short-term, and long-term housing that they would need to flourish. And as many of you all know, our social service and emergency housing systems are overburdened, and they're trying to deal with issues on the back end that have been created on the front end through over-policing and over-incarcerating folks. And so in many ways, to be a criminalized person is to live in a perpetual state of precarity, instability, insecurity, with limited access to the kinds of resources that they truly need. And so what I find over and over again through my interviews with formerly incarcerated people is that they simply want access, they simply want opportunities, and they simply want the resources that would allow them to live stable, flourishing lives, right? And so what do we do? How do we attack this issue? How do we end the sort of criminalization to homelessness pipeline? And I think there are actually many ways that we need to attack this issue, but I want to offer up 3 sort of policy-based moves, legislative moves that we can implement to sort of interrupt that pipeline. And so the first is ending our reliance on over-policing and over-incarcerating, right? And so today, this is where the discussion has been around policing in the United States. And so this would certainly help to prevent folks leaving prison and not having a place to go and dealing with all of the stigma around a criminal record. But secondly, I want to offer the idea that we should ban the box on housing applications, right? And so a criminal record is really not a good proxy for one's suitability as a tenant. And so banning the box on housing applications would help to level the playing field. Lastly, I want to offer the idea that we should implement automatic criminal record expungement procedures, right? So when folks are convicted of a crime and sentenced, rarely are they ever sentenced to periods of housing insecurity or homelessness. But the fact remains, folks with criminal records often experience, as a collateral consequence, homelessness and housing insecurity. And so implementing automatic criminal record procedures would help them move on with their lives and enter into stable housing arrangements. And so I hope this was helpful. Thank you all for allowing me to be in discussion and in conversation with you all. And I hope we can continue this fight. Peace.
Funders Together to End Homelessness is a national network of more than 250 foundations, United Ways, corporate giving programs, and individual philanthropists devoted to ending and preventing homelessness. As an organization, we work to mobilize our members to utilize the voice, influence, and expertise of philanthropy in ways that will advance lasting solutions to end homelessness, including addressing its underlying causes like structural and racial inequities, and to help create policies and systems that center people with lived expertise. Last year, we released 8 commitments and 4 aspirations for our work around addressing structural racism and inequities that contribute to housing instability and homelessness. This year, our commitment and our members' learning to action journey to move from being quietly non-racist to vocally anti-racist was put to the test. The disparities we are seeing in who's impacted by COVID-19 are rooted in structural racism and are not about race. This is not about pre-existing conditions. It's about pre-existing inequities from stolen indigenous land and chattel slavery. As Race Forward reminds us, COVID-19 kills. Structural racism is its accomplice. The uprising in response to the public lynching of Black men and continued killing of Black women and Black trans women is in response to our country's inattention and silence. Racism has been taking every opportunity from us to feel like we can breathe without oppression in our housing, education, health, and criminal legal system. The public lynching of Black people takes our breath away, and constant structural racism is killing us slowly, leaving us gasping for air as we call out for real change through anti-racist policies. Philanthropy could be silent no longer. It was time to speak with action. In the last few weeks, I've seen foundations recognize that response to this global pandemic, recovery, restoration, and hopefully redesign had to center racial equity. That more money from philanthropy or our government would not fix the problem alone. That resources had to go to people who had been historically marginalized first and every time resources were allocated. Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, LGBTQ people, and youth are often overlooked and left out of the response and recovery efforts, and philanthropy had to respond differently. The reckoning for funders is that community, organizations, activists, and organizers that are people of color led or people of color focused are often the first responders to a housing or health crisis. And for these historically marginalized communities that are not a part of mainstream systems or resources, we had to think differently about the way we traditionally fund and reimagine to ensure these communities had access to funding and were at decision-making tables with real power. We've seen foundations champion and fund grassroots organizations and organizing led by people of color to work with federal, state, and local leaders to advance equitable implementation of the relief package funds and recovery efforts. Philanthropy has supported real-time evaluation so communities can pivot, course correct, especially if funding and interventions are not meeting the needs of populations disproportionately impacted. Philanthropy has supported efforts led by national organizations to work with communities overwhelmed by information to provide practical and a usable framework for recovery rooted in equity and justice. I've seen funders recognize we need a response that included immediate needs while still supporting advocacy and policy at the federal and state level to bring systemic relief to communities through public funding. Finally, in response to our country's painfully slow awakening to 400 plus years of oppression, I saw foundations like the Zero Family Fund, whose focus has been on ending homelessness and mental health, in a matter of 3 days, give up power. They dedicated a fund to racial justice and rightfully turned over decision-making power to that fund to Black and Indigenous leaders in their community. So the question for all of us moving forward, not just funders, but all who are gatekeepers to power and resources, how will you collaborate with people of color and people with lived expertise to give up and share power? So we can reimagine our response to ending homelessness to be rooted in anti-racist policies and practices.
Thank you, Amanda, for your bold and fearless leadership. One way to answer Amanda's charge is to remember that we all have a right to vote. And we must ensure that everyone that we serve has all of the information that they need in order to exercise their right to vote. We all have a stake in ensuring that our systems are non-racist, equitable, just, and that they are actually ending homelessness for all. Join the Alliance's new campaign, Everyone Votes. You have a stake in elections, by visiting our website, signing up to get alerts, and to learn more about this new initiative. Thank you.
This poem is dedicated to the forgotten people and the magnanimous ones who refuse to allow them to be forgotten. See, complacency can be the death of you, being okay with okay. But mediocrity can get the best of us and the rest of us. Until we're all awakened, there can be no rest for you. See, the house still dirty, we just cleaned up the vestibule. My people was promised 40 acres. We just settled for a mule the day the donkey was beat by the elephant in the room. See, giants built plantations and pyramids too. So much beauty in the mind of the oppressed and beaten, but never broken. Never be broken. Never be token. Be gold and be jackpot. Never be confused by cynics. Optimism is not hoping and wishing. It's knowing and going. It's seeing and showing. It's believing and being. It's knowing that you was promised greater and going to get it. It's seeing bright lights in dark times and showing the blind. It's believing that dreams are divine conversations and being a personification of those divine conversations. See, optimism ain't just fluffs and frills. It's knowing that the yellow brick road is behind the lion's den. It's through the forest of attack dogs, over the mountain of supremacy, through the valley of the shadow of death, under the monsoon of naysayers, and still lacing up your boots and saying, follow me. It's meeting the Wizard of Oz and telling him, you are not my God. And finding no tact in his alternative facts and standing on the shoulders of ancestors just to get a better view of heaven. Optimism is an action. It's a verb. It's seeing your way out of unforeseeable. See, it's faith's call to action. It's a little black boy from Chicago who rode his way out, saw the beauty in his people and his city, and wouldn't shut his mouth about it. You are looking at a lucid dreamer. I decided to control my narrative, find pride in my heritage while never undermining another and never succumbing to mediocrity. Not as long as there's still forgotten people in my city who continue to be walked over, stepped over, looked by, while people just stand by with a blind eye. They've yet to visit an optometrist, so their optimism is just a little bit blurry. Too much PTSD, all that gunpowder packed up in the corner of their retinas, too many corners. Too much survivor's guilt, so sleep cometh in the morning, or maybe never, because nightmares, they run rampant. And the vision is as bleak as the resources they're surrounded by. And imagine, that's the type of people you're surrounded by on a daily basis. You want to be a light, but you're an isolated oasis. And eventually, you get swallowed up in a swamp of struggle. Your character gets inverted. And this is no city for the introverted, so you speak now, you forever hold your peace. The pandemic of the pessimistic, how contagious is it? I mean, you live long enough to be a warrior or a witness. I mean, what's the use of waiting on the right time when time ain't never waited on you? It goes on with or without you. You might as well have a say in it. So please understand that dreams are beacons of light, and dreamers are light towers, and this world is made up majority of oceans. It's hard to swim through those waters in the dark, trying to navigate. Some can swim their way through the waters, others, they just waiting in the water for you to shine your light so they can wade in the water. This is the life of Pi. We waiting on dreamers to illuminate the night. So please, be an ultra light being.
Thank you, Mr. Green. What an incredibly powerful piece. Through Mr. Green's words and artistry, he inspires, captivates, and calls us to action. I'm Kristi Schulenberg, the Director for the Center for Capacity Building at the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Mr. Green reminds us that optimism isn't just hoping and wishing. It's knowing and going. It's believing we are promised something greater. The realities of homelessness and the impact that the pandemic has had on people experiencing homelessness, especially Black, Indigenous people of color, have shown us that we cannot let mediocrity get the best of us. As we work to respond to the injustices that lead to homelessness, we must put into action the lessons we're learning now. We must believe that our response to ending homelessness is better when done in collaboration and partnership with people with lived experience and through deeper, more collaborative relationships with the healthcare system and public health. Bold and innovative leadership is what's required of us to chart the path forward. At the National Alliance, we continue to explore and establish ways to engage in and support you in the important work you do. One of the ways we're doing that is through the Center for Learning, a comprehensive online platform of tools, technical assistance, and information for frontline service providers, key stakeholders, and system leaders. We're researching and collecting data on how communities are effectively bringing together and reinvigorating partnerships between healthcare and the housing sectors. And we're rethinking what it means to use funds strategically in order to house people more quickly. Remember, as Mr. Green proclaimed, optimism is an action. It's seeing your way out of the unforeseeable. It's a verb. So let us lace up our boots and say, come follow me. Please continue to listen to our next set of speakers.
Hello, I'm Bobby Watts. I'm the CEO of the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, and I commend and congratulate the National Alliance to End Homelessness for convening this virtual national town hall on ending homelessness and giving us a chance to together reflect on the lessons learned through our response to the COVID pandemic, especially as it relates to people experiencing homelessness. The National Healthcare for the Homeless Council supports the 300 Healthcare for the Homeless programs and approximately 100 medical respite programs throughout the country that are every day providing health care to people experiencing homelessness, health education to prevent disease, as well as medical respite services to provide a place for people who no longer need to be in a hospital, give them a safe place to heal, because they often are not well enough to return to a general shelter, to a friend's couch, and certainly not to the streets. From the very beginning of this pandemic, the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council was extremely concerned, because we know that people who are experiencing homelessness are much less likely to be able to practice the conditions that will allow them to escape being exposed to the disease. If you are living in a congregate care setting, you as a shelter or a rescue mission, you cannot practice safe distancing. If you are living in an encampment or on the streets, you are not able to practice safe hand washing, which is the #1 CDC recommendation. We also knew that because of the higher rates of disease, underlying health conditions among people who are experiencing homelessness than in the general population, once one was exposed to the virus, we believed it would lead to greater chances of developing disease and ultimately death. Those of you on the front lines in healthcare for the homeless clinics and medical respite programs, in shelters, doing street outreach, doing street medicine, working in supportive housing should be commended for how you as a community have responded to the needs of our neighbors without homes. Because of some of the heroic efforts that you have done, how you have been able to switch on a fly in switching to telehealth instead of having people come into clinics, in decompressing your shelters and figuring out how to deliver meals on the go when you've been for 100 years delivering meals in your cafeteria, how you have spaced out your shelters, changed some of your procedures, is just incredible, commendable, and heroic. We have a long way to go, but we have moved further through this pandemic in seeing how we can work together, how healthcare organizations and shelter and housing organizations can work together to protect the health, to promote the health of and well-being of our neighbors without homes. One of the things I am greatly encouraged by is my belief that these partnerships that have been developed, the lessons that we have learned, we have built muscle and muscle memory that we can call upon now as we prepare for the next wave of the pandemic, or for the continuing wave of this pandemic, but also for future emergencies that may come up in unexpected ways. We've learned to speak truth to power so that our elected officials and our bureaucracies, our government bureaucracies, are more responsive to the needs of people experiencing homelessness, either in shelters, on the streets, in encampments, in supportive housing. And we are moving closer to the day when more people recognize that housing is healthcare. And by everyone facing this pandemic, realizing that healthcare is a human right. Housing is a human right. So continue the great work. I salute you. The National Healthcare for the Homeless Council joins you, and we are in this together for the long haul. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Steve DeLell of the Connecticut Department of Housing. I hope everybody is staying safe during these uncertain times. I want to thank the National Alliance to End Homelessness for this opportunity to explain how Connecticut was able to manage the COVID-19 pandemic amongst its homeless population. I also want to say a great thank you to our frontline workers who risked their health and safety on a daily basis to ensure our homeless population had a safe place to stay. In the beginning of March of this year, community spread of COVID-19 began to happen. We at the Department of Housing quickly realized of the harmful effects that COVID-19 could have amongst our homeless population, especially those who are age 60 and older. We immediately were able to identify those homeless individuals that were age 60 and older and immediately place them in hotels using state funds. At the same time, we also realized that community spread within a homeless shelter is quite possible due to the close quarters, and this could actually create a larger public health crisis as community spread can continue outside of the shelter. Therefore, we worked with our Department of Public Health to create an executive order that stated that non-congregate sheltering would be the best opportunity for the homeless population. With that executive order in hand, we were able to work with FEMA to get approval for non-congregate sheltering. Once we had those approvals in hand, we were able to work with our Department of Administrative Services to locate hotels across the state. Ultimately, we were able to contract with 13 hotels for approximately 850 rooms for our homeless population. This allowed us to decrease our shelter census by nearly 60%. Therefore, those who were left in shelter had enough space within that shelter to adequately social distance. And obviously, those who were in hotels also had the space to socially distance. Our quick reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic and our ability to set up hotels has led to an extremely low rate of COVID-19 positive cases amongst the homeless population in Connecticut. In fact, we started a broad testing protocol, and amongst our first few hotels that we've tested, with approximately 300 individuals, we've only found 2 people who have been COVID positive. So now we know that our efforts have been successful in slowing down community transmission of this virus. We know, however, that hoteling is just a short-term answer. The ultimate answer for preventing community spread amongst the homeless population is to house as many people as possible. Therefore, we've entered into our second phase of managing this pandemic, which may even be harder than the first. And that is, we need to house as many of our homeless population as possible. So we set on a campaign to house 1,000 additional households above our normal 800 households for a total of 1,800 households we need to house in the next 90 days. If we are successful in that, we will be able to continue to have shelter censuses that are low that will also prevent the community spread of COVID-19 as we enter into the fall. We are looking toward a variety of different resources to be able to house these individuals and families. We are looking toward our ESG resources and rapid rehousing resources, as well as leveraging other state and federal resources to provide diversion and rapid exit and eviction prevention. We know that when we work together, we can have great outcomes and great effects with ultimately housing as many homeless people as possible, because we know with the work that we do, this is the best way for success, both in the short term for preventing the spread of COVID-19, but ultimately in the long term, because if we can end homelessness in Connecticut, our entire state will be a much better place for it. If anybody has any questions, you can please feel free to reach out to me at any time, and we'll gladly walk you through how we've been able to manage this situation here in Connecticut. So I just want to say thank you one more time, and good luck to everybody else who has to manage this COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Nichelle Carver. I am the Associate Director of the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Unit at the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. And I wanted to share with you all some of the exciting things that Virginia is doing for our most vulnerable citizens in response to the COVID-19 epidemic. So first, with the support of our Governor Ralph Northam, our Secretariat, and our leadership, we were able to prioritize folks who were experiencing unsheltered homelessness immediately when the crisis hit. We focused on people who were sleeping outside, people who were unable to social distance in shelters because they were too large and not enough space, and also shelters who had limits to folks staying there during the day and had to leave. So we helped them to become 24-hour shelters or get people into hotel motels. So what was very difficult initially was trying to figure out how to get all of this done as quickly as possible, with the understanding that folks didn't have time for us to map out these grand plans. They needed help immediately, and we had to respond immediately. So our teams worked day and night for weeks to make sure that we had the resources and the methods to get people into hotel motels. This meant people who were in campgrounds, people who were just sleeping in their cars, wherever they were. If they were unsheltered, they were our top priority. We then started thinking, we do not want people to go back into unsheltered homelessness when this is over. Because when there are stay-at-home orders or safer-at-home orders, if you have no home, then you are immediately in jeopardy. You are the most vulnerable. Your life preservation is in danger. And so we thought we have got to have a better response than to just say, well, the crisis is over. You may go back to where you were. And so we worked very closely with our continuum of cares to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to help our most vulnerable citizens? And so we took all of these lemons made by COVID-19 and started crafting a plan for ending homelessness in Virginia. We have a little under 6,000 individuals who experience homeless on any given night, and through our point in time count. And so we wanted to make sure that we start looking at, how do we permanently house individuals? Now, here's the thing. We don't have enough affordable housing in Virginia. Like most places, don't have enough affordable housing. So it means getting partners around the table that our homeless service providers may not have worked with before. We need to get builders around the table. We need to get developers around the table. We need to get folks around the table who can create the housing we need. And we actually think that in the next couple of years, we may be able to end homelessness in Virginia. We are excited about it. We all came into this work with the knowledge that if we did it right, we wouldn't have jobs. And I'm okay with that. Like, I am okay with working myself out of a job or making my job look very different if it means that every individual in the Commonwealth of Virginia can be in housing within 30 days of falling into homelessness, or never falling into homelessness in the first place. So thank you for your time and listening to me. Hopefully we can create a blueprint that can be used throughout the country. Again, Virginia has a smaller population of people experiencing homelessness compared to other places, but it's relative to who we are and what we have as resources. And we're going to use our resources wisely to make sure that we take this crisis and turn it into something that's amazing for people in need. Thank you so much for your time. And my name is Nichelle Carver, and the National Alliance knows how to reach me. And I also want to thank the National Alliance for providing this forum for me to share our exciting news about what we're doing in Virginia. Thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Governor Gavin Newsom. I want to just thank Nan, her team, all of you assembled here virtually for this important conference, National Alliance to End Homelessness, coming together every year, committed to a common cause, a faith, a devotion to ending homelessness here in this nation, the wealthiest nation that God has ever conceived. It is a national disgrace. And I can say this as someone who's been at this for years and years and years, as a former county supervisor, former mayor, lieutenant governor, now governor. We own this. Society becomes how we behave. We are our behaviors. And we could point fingers. We could talk about the good old days 30, 40, 50 years ago when respectfully HUD was in the housing business. We can talk about the fact that, shelters solve sleep, and housing and supportive services solve homelessness. But we have to sort of move past the platitudes and take some responsibility and ownership, not just those of you here assembled as leaders in this space, but all of us in society, to reconcile that the ultimate manifestation of our failure is stepping over people on the streets and sidewalks. It is a remarkable moment in our nation's history and our world's history. And in the midst of all this uncertainty, fear, and anxiety comes opportunity, innovation. And I think this cause of this virtual conference is an example of that innovation, but also a spirit of constancy and hopefully a spirit of renewal. Renewal in terms of our own commitment, in terms of our efforts to begin to look anew at opportunities and be more deliberative in our approach and be more demonstrable in terms of our results. And so I commit to all of you as governor of California with the largest homeless population in this nation to work in a constructive manner, again, with an open hand, not a closed fist, not pointing fingers, not abdicating responsibility, but to look at best practices, be willing to iterate, challenge the norms, and move with a deliberative speed to address this crisis in the manner that this moment deserves. When we look back, I'll close on this. When we look back in the rearview mirror on the acuity of this crisis, it was of extraordinary magnitude. As we look out the windshield with the expectation of all this dislocation because of this pandemic and the growing divide in this nation as it relates to income and wealth disparities, we have our work cut out for us, but we're more than capable. And we're more more enlivened today, I think, than ever to meet our capacity with real results and accountability. So, Nan, thank you for all of your good work and your inspiration, your faith in all of us that are assembled here today. And thank you to all of you all across the country for your incredible work and providing us the inspiration that we need to keep going to end homelessness in the United States.
Thank you to the leaders of Virginia, Connecticut, and Governor Newsom of California. As the director of the Homelessness Research Institute, I would also like to thank the many COC leaders who have been participating in our COVID-19 survey project, both the past and ongoing versions. We always appreciate hearing from you. In general, we appreciate everyone contributing to an environment of high-quality data collection. This information is crucial in understanding who is homeless, including according to race, gender, and other demographic characteristics. It's also helpful in understanding where they are homeless, in shelter or in unsheltered locations, and how their homeless situations are ultimately resolved. Together, these bits of information paint a picture of patterns and best practices that will ultimately reduce and end homelessness. And now to a speaker who knows full well the value of data, the eviction data guru himself, Matthew Desmond.
Hi everyone, my name is Matt Desmond. I'm a professor of sociology at Princeton University, where I direct the eviction lab, and I'm the author of the book Evicted. I want to begin by just thanking all of you for the incredibly morally urgent work you are doing during this pandemic and that you've done before and you will do after, serving our most vulnerable citizens. I know that many of you are losing sleep, figuring out how to keep homeless families safe during a crisis where shelter is the best medicine. And I just want you to know that I appreciate you, that I take inspiration from you, and that I can't wait to see the good work you do here and moving forward. I've been asked to talk about the link between eviction and homelessness. This is a established, durable link. Eviction causes loss. Families lose not only their homes, but often their schools, their neighborhoods, their possessions, which are piled on the streets by movers or scavenged by neighbors. It takes a good amount of time and money to build a home, and eviction can erase all that. An eviction causes a blemish or a mark on your record, which should drive you into worse neighborhoods and worse housing. It's been linked to job loss and depression. Eviction isn't just a condition of poverty, it's a cause of poverty and a cause of homelessness. Before the COVID outbreak, in an average year in America, 3.7 million evictions were filed all around the country. That's 7 evictions filed every single minute. That number far exceeds the number of foreclosure starts, even at the height of the foreclosure crisis. If you look at rent data, you might think the housing crisis is in Washington, D.C., and San Francisco, and New York City, really expensive places. But if you look at eviction, you see that this crisis is nationwide, something all of you already know. The highest evicting cities are places like Albuquerque, New Mexico, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we see eviction ravaging small towns and suburban communities as well. So this is a crisis of national proportions. In the months after COVID hit, states released eviction moratorium, which stopped the bleeding. But those moratoria are now beginning to lift, and the federal government and states have not responded to the rental crisis. if nothing else changes, it's hard to imagine us not seeing a wave of evictions and a wave of homelessness wash over the country. So I think this is an especially crucial time to keep pushing forward the message that eviction is not a solution. It is a problem. Eviction is not solving anyone's problems right now. It's not getting landlords paid, and it certainly is only going to spread more poverty and homelessness and disease under these conditions. States can do a lot of things to respond to the looming eviction crisis. They can increase the moratoriums. They can install mediation courts, so there's something that gets worked out between landlords and tenants. But most importantly, they can advocate for rental relief, which we need to see at the state level and the federal level as well. I want to just thank you all for your work and plug something that we've just developed. My team at the Eviction Lab has produced something called the Eviction Tracking System. This is our attempt to look at evictions in real time to see what are they doing after the moratoriums lift. We've released data on several cities across the country. We'd love to release more. You can go to our website, which is evictionlab.org, and see the tracker and look at what evictions are doing in your communities. This is a time where national data on this issue are very, very important, and it just reminds us how much work we have to do to get good data so we stop designing policy in the dark. Thank you all so much for all your work and all your efforts and all your brilliance. I wish you all the best and hope you have a great meeting. Thanks.
Well, thank you to Matthew Desmond, whose work has had a huge impact around the country. Hi, my name's Steve Berg. I'm the Vice President for Programs and Policy at the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and I'm kicking off the part of our program today that talks about federal policy and the role it has. We're, of course, at a critical time right now with homeless people in grave danger, with millions of more people in danger of becoming homeless, and we need the federal government and the U.S. Congress to step up. As we speak, right now, Congress is considering another major emergency funding bill in order to help communities deal with the coronavirus and the resulting economic downturn. It's up to us to make sure that the members of Congress understand how homelessness is impacted and what they can do to help. You'll be hearing later in the program from Jerry Jones about what you can do to get that message across to the people who represent you. But right now, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce some members of Congress from both political parties and from both House and Senate who have proven repeatedly that they understand and that they're willing to take a stand for homeless people. And first, it's my great honor to introduce to you the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, representing San Francisco, California, Nancy Pelosi.
Hello. It is a privilege to send warm greetings and gratitude to the tireless advocates, leaders, and community organizers participating in the National Association to End Homelessness nationwide town hall. For 37 years, the Alliance has been a powerful force for progress in the fight to end homelessness. Thank you, Nan Roman, for your extraordinary leadership and all that you do to give voice to those experiencing homelessness. With countless veterans, families, children, and the most vulnerable in America on the streets, the epidemic of homelessness challenges the conscience of our country. It is our moral responsibility to increase the supply of affordable housing and provide our most effective communities with urgent resources for shelters and for other essential supportive services. As our nation confronts the ongoing coronavirus crisis, the threat to those experiencing homelessness is particularly dire. The CARES Act provided $4 billion for homelessness assistance and $3 billion to help low-income families remain stably housed, including support for persons with AIDS, but more is desperately needed. Last month, we passed the HEROES Act, which extended the eviction moratorium through March of next year, and provided $175 billion to support renters and prevent families from losing their homes during the epidemic. actually the pandemic. And we appropriated more than $11 billion in emergency solution grants to help state and local governments support those experiencing homelessness. To deliver on our promise for the people, we also passed the Moving Forward Act, our sweeping $1.5 trillion bill to rebuild America's infrastructure. That bill includes $100 billion investment in our country's public and affordable housing infrastructure. Thank you, Maxine Waters. Despite these critical investments, to fully end the scourge of homelessness, we must also continue to fight ongoing stigma and discrimination faced by those experiencing homelessness. We continue to oppose efforts to roll back vital HUD protections for the LGBTQ community, which experiences a disproportionately high rate of homelessness, particularly trans individuals. And House members are committed to advancing evidence-based solutions to end homelessness and ensuring that those experiencing it continue to have access to the ballot box. Together with the Alliance's incredible advocates, we will not rest until we have marshaled the resources needed to tackle this epidemic. On behalf of the United States Congress, thank you for your partnership and persistent, dissatisfied leadership in our mission to end homelessness once and for all. Thank you.
Good afternoon. The coronavirus is causing great anxiety and disruption. The work being celebrated today is exactly the kind of thoughtful and productive response needed at this difficult time. Mother Teresa once said that the cruelest poverty is not being unfed and unsheltered. It's being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for. With compassion, vision, and expertise, advocates for the homeless work toward the goal that no one has to suffer the poverty of neglect. The shortage of affordable and safe housing is a growing crisis nationwide. The pandemic puts the homeless at especially high risk. As chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds and oversees HUD, I've worked with many of you to increase funding for homeless individuals and families across the country. Together, we are making a difference for all who are homeless, including our youth and our veterans. An estimated 4.2 million young people experience homelessness at some point in a year. The Bipartisan Runaway and Homeless Youth and Trafficking Prevention Act that I introduced with Senator Leahy would reauthorize key federal programs to help provide transitional housing, street outreach, and crisis intervention. In addition, it would expand protections to young people who are particularly vulnerable to human trafficking and other forms of abuse. The progress we are making in reducing homelessness, developing new permanent supportive housing, and promoting evidence-based practices is the result of the dedication of countless advocates like you. The pandemic will not deter us from this important mission. Thank you, and please keep up your great work.
Thank you for inviting me to speak at the National Alliance to End Homelessness nationwide town hall. I commend you all for the invaluable work in advocating for the end of homelessness, and I applaud your dedication and your service. As a former chairman of the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriations Subcommittee, and now as ranking member, I work day in and day out to ensure that every individual has a place to call home. In my previous term as chairman, I was proud to have included over $2.6 billion in homeless assistance grants. And in fiscal year 2020, we kept that momentum going. Working alongside my partner and my friend, Chairman David Price, we passed a strong bill which included $2.77 billion for homeless assistance. And now as we move forward with the FY21 bills and face a pandemic that, frankly, we have not experienced in generations, rest assured that I will fight to protect and assist our nation's homeless population. I've seen firsthand how far our dollars go when Miami-Dade County effectively ended veterans' homelessness back in 2018. My appreciation and gratitude to Ronnie Book and the entire team at the Miami-Dade Homeless Trust for getting it done. Well done. Now let me tell you, my job is a lot easier when I have the backing, obviously, of my colleagues in Congress. And that is where you play such a unique role. Your advocacy ensures members of Congress are educated on the importance of homeless assistance funding. And I can truthfully say that the funding that we've been able to achieve would not be possible without the support, without the hard work of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. So I thank you, and I encourage you to continue to engage with those of us policymakers in Washington, D.C. Thank you all for, again, letting me speak to you, and more importantly, thank you for all you do for our nation's less fortunate. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today. First and foremost, I want to thank Nan Roman, President and CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. I want to thank her for her leadership on addressing one of the most serious problems in our country today, homelessness. And I want to commend all of you, particularly Steve Berg and David Dirks, and of course the officers and the entire staff, for your tireless hard work to help people experiencing homelessness find safe and stable housing during this public health crisis. You are the essential workers who are holding our nation together, putting your health at risk each day to help others in need. I commend you for all of your efforts during this difficult time. As you know, America was facing an affordable housing and homelessness crisis before this pandemic hit. That's why my very first hearing of my committee was to consider the Ending Homelessness Act, a bill I introduced to provide more than $13 billion in new resources to comprehensively address the homelessness crisis. Now, with so many families struggling as a result of the pandemic, we're now on the precipice of an eviction and homeless crisis like we've never seen before. The wave of evictions will disproportionately fall on households of color who have borne the brunt of the coronavirus pandemic. We know all too well what happens to families, and especially children, when their homes are forcibly taken from them. I will never forget the story of Jeffrey Williams, who testified before our committee about how his family was evicted from their home and became homeless. He talked about what it was like when all of his belongings were put out onto the sidewalk as he and his children were forced out of their home. He told us how he fell behind on rent while trying to obtain training for a higher paying job. He told us how the sheriff banged on his door one morning while his 9-year-old son was getting ready for school, and how he and his wife watched as all of their personal belongings were thrown onto the front line, including items with sentimental value, like their wedding photos. We cannot sit idly by and let the coming eviction crisis cause irreparable harm to millions of families around the country, like it did to Mr. Williams and his family. The CARES Act was an important step towards providing relief, including $4 billion in homelessness assistance, but we know much more is needed to be done. That's why the House passed the HEROES Act back in May, and more recently, because of the pressing emergency need for housing relief, the House passed the Emergency Housing Protections and Relief Act of 2020 just last week. My committee put together a comprehensive legislative response that was included in these bills to address our country's most pressing housing needs during the pandemic. I am determined to see this legislation become law. Our response includes $100 billion for an emergency rental assistance program to help people pay their rent and utility bills and avoid eviction. $11.5 billion for for homelessness assistance to ensure homelessness service providers working on the front line of the COVID-19 pandemic have the resources they need to assist people experiencing homelessness, and $1 billion in new housing choice vouchers, which will be targeted to people experiencing or at risk of homelessness and survivors of domestic violence to help ensure that progress in reducing homelessness is maintained during and after the pandemic. If we do not pass this relief, the pandemic will only deepen the pain of low-income communities, including low-income communities of color. So I want to thank you for supporting these legislative proposals, and I look forward to working with you to ensure we are protecting our country's most vulnerable families. Thank you all so very much.
A warm thanks to members of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives for those powerful messages. We are fortunate to have people in Congress who understand the homeless crisis and the scarcity of affordable housing, and more importantly, are committed to working with the Alliance and all of you on real solutions. I'm Jerry Jones, National Field Director for the Alliance. With your help, we are building the largest, most representative network of homeless advocates across the country. Whether you're a direct service provider, a builder of affordable housing, someone involved in your continuum of care, a person who has experienced homelessness firsthand, or really anyone who's outraged that so many Americans have nowhere to lay their heads at night. We need your participation in our advocacy efforts. I'm standing here in Skid Row, a 54-block area in downtown Los Angeles that represents the largest concentration of homelessness in America. It's a determined and resilient community of more than 5,000 homeless people, but it's an example of just how bad the homeless crisis has gotten. I'm here to introduce to you Suzette Shaw, a longtime champion of people who live in Skid Row. We're honored to have Suzette join us today.
Hello, National Alliance. I am pleased to join today's National Town Hall on Ending Homelessness. My name is Suzette Shaw. I'm a Skid Row resident. I write, talk, and I advocate Skid Row from a woman's perspective. I speak to you today as a person who has experienced homelessness firsthand. Almost 8 years ago, I came to a community called Skid Row because I had no other place to go. Devastated by all that I'd been through, my trauma was further exacerbated by a system set up to devalue my worth. My trials have become my testimony. My testimony has fueled my advocacy, and my advocacy is the reason why I'm here before you today. In 2010, I lost my job. Subsequently, I lost my home 2 years later after not being able to find sustainable employment. I used to consider myself privileged with my own office, name plaque on my door. I now consider myself free. I call my office the streets. Had I not been displaced to Skid Row, I probably never would have known about this contained community, which is the hidden shame behind the Hollywood glitz and glam. In Los Angeles, Black folks are roughly 9% of the overall population, yet approximately 40% live in poverty to homelessness. Skid Row being predominantly a Black community, it looks like the slave motherships were capsized here. Understandably, trauma intersects with poverty and displacement. Many of us women who have been displaced to Skid Row, trauma has played a factor in our displacement. Yet too often, it tends to play a role in how we are treated and hindering us in gaining assistance. Civilian trauma, intergenerational trauma, impoverished network trauma, and living in water and food deserts become normalized as a way to blame and shame people for not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. Many of the women I have met along the way are stories intertwined by a single thread. In Skid Row, Black middle-aged to elderly women are one of the #1 demographics displaced into poverty and homelessness, not just year after year, but literally decade after decade. Although we tend to be pathologized as to who we are as displaced residents of Skid Row, being Black, poor, disabled, aging out of life and life systems, and even at times, debacles of the struggling middle class. The color of our skin, as well as our socioeconomic life, too often have played integral roles as to the stigmas which displaced us. To pathologize someone for their circumstance is to normalize, deflect, and justify ordinances and laws, and even systematic oppression, which penalizes, criminalizes, and even destroys overall demographics of people, and even displaces them through gentrification and updated Jim Crow laws. Ironically, I have learned more about my identity as a Black woman living in Skid Row than at any other time in my life. Prior to my displacement, I blamed myself for what I was going through, not realizing that the system was never set up to support me, no matter how hard I worked or tried to fit in. Understanding the intersection of poverty, displacement, and systemic failures, yet intentions which created the division of the haves and the have-nots, has been a mission of my journey towards healing and making sense of my Black female aging identity. Traumatized, I lost my sense of purpose. But my journey towards healing has resulted in my mission, which is to be part of the solution for myself and others. Whether it was facilitating a weekly wellness or women's empowerment group, a radio segment, news column, grassroots advocating in the community for others and myself, demonstrating for fairness and equity, sitting on a community board, speaking out of college, my lived expertise has brought a unique perspective, which unfortunately too often is left out of the conversation. I argue that this is the problem. A paradigm shift will come when the powers that be and those running the systems not only make room at their tables for the voices of those like myself with lived expertise, but when they are willing to step back and allow us as their colleagues with a disability to lead the conversations, thus be the voice of solution as it relates to systematic decisions which stand to affect our quality of life. And so I say to you, my brothers and sisters who walk this journey of homelessness, rise up. Let's fight against inequality. Rise up. Let's take back our democracy. Rise up. Let's change these moral injuries. Rise up and let's fight through advocacy. Won't you join me?
Thank you, Suzette. We've heard from our elected representatives about the COVID relief bill that's moving through Congress this month, sometime before August. And we've also heard Suzette's call to action. And we can see for ourselves the scale of this crisis and the folks who are out here fending for themselves in the midst of this deadly pandemic, many of them struggling with poor health to begin with. And millions more are predicted to join them if we don't address the coming wave of evictions from the economic recession. Next week, the Senate returns to Washington to begin work on the legislative debate that the House has been pursuing for several months, whether to invest $11.5 billion in homelessness assistance, $100 billion in emergency rental assistance, and critical investments in housing vouchers. And despite the urgency of winning those resources, there's no guarantee that Congress will act. They need to hear from us. We have to communicate the kind of urgency that convinces Congress to take action. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can click the link in the video description below to take action. If you're watching on YouTube, you can click the icon over my shoulder, which will take you to a link that easily and quickly allows you to send a message to Congress. But please act now. If we speak out together, we can do something about this and win the resources that we so desperately need.
we're Sarati. I'm Imaja.
And I'm Sayer.
And we want to give a special thanks to the National
Alliance to End Homelessness.
And we're so excited to be joining you guys at the 2020 Town Hall of Ending Homelessness, okay? We work with organizations like Covenant House in LA, okay?
Yes.
So you guys know how important this is to us.
Yes, very. But we have a special thanks to the volunteering staff who continue to help the homeless population, not just through these trying times of COVID-19, but also year-round.
And we also want to encourage and remind the staff to remember to register all homeless individuals because their voice matters, okay?
Your hard work doesn't go unnoticed.
Hi everyone, John Bon Jovi here. I have the great honor of closing today's 2020 nationwide town hall to end homelessness. I hope you enjoyed the opportunity to virtually connect with one another, to celebrate the work that you do day in and day out and help prevent and end homelessness in the United States. And that you gained insights from the innovative work being done on this important issue across the country amid this COVID-19 pandemic. Like the many heroes we have seen and heard over the last few months, you too are heroes in my book. Risking your health and safety to be on the front lines to help individuals and families, accessing the critical services and resources they need to keep them safe, and to prevent the community spread of the coronavirus from temporary housing, healthcare, and healthy meals to so much more. Thank you. Thank you, thank you to all of the organizations and the programs that you represent for your passion and your tireless commitment during these challenging times. If anything, this pandemic has shown that we're all in this together. What affects one of us affects all of us. So thank you for stepping up in your communities when they need you the most. I'd also like to give a shout out to Nan Roman and the National Alliance to End Homelessness for the relentless work that you do to help inform and to shape policy on the issue of homelessness, to ensure that every person in our nation has a home and the access to health care that they so deserve. Oh, and before I sign off, I have to ask of you, in order to continue to affect change on this issue, please make sure that your voice is heard loud and clear by voting for the right leaders at the local, the state, and the federal level. Together, we can create hope, we can change lives, we can make a difference. So be safe and be well.
Racial justice is housing justice. Thank you for all your hard work.
On behalf of the Center for Capacity Building here at the Alliance, thank you for all that you do.
We know how hard this work is, so thank you. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you for all you do to serve people experiencing homelessness. Housing is not only healthcare, it's a human right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of the incredible work you're doing, and we hope to see you sometime soon.
Thank you for all of your hard work and your dedication.
It takes a lot of heart to be able to do what you're doing.
We thank you for your commitment and your dedication.
No one is safe until everyone has a home. Thank you to the Alliance's many field partners across the country.
Thank you for all of your hard work to end homelessness and to fight for racial justice.
Those of you on the front line, those of you the system planning, every day you're out there trying to make sure that our homeless neighbors are safe.
Housing is healthcare. We appreciate everything you do. Thank you.
And thanks for continuing to take the time to educate your lawmakers and their staffs about your resource needs and policy concerns. It's so important.
Thank you for your tireless efforts on behalf of people experiencing homelessness.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of the hard work that you're doing to house our neighbors.
Thank you for everything you're doing.
We know that together we will end homelessness.
Listen to the sound
going down with chaos all around. And the mother reassures herself everything will be alright as she steps in rhythm to the sound of the siren. I got to get home.